I am delighted to introduce our speaker this morning, Karen Adams. Karen, the first time I got to see this talk, and I just love that first slide. That just looks great. I wish I could get that many hummingbirds in my yard. Is just, wow, that is so fun to look at. Karen is been with the Master Gardeners for several years and has come up with a number of talks, but the hummingbird talk certainly is one of my favorites. So with that, Karen, thank you so much for taking the time this morning and speaking, and I will turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Gary. I want to start off by saying thank you to the Washington State University Extension Office and also the Cowlitz County Master Gardeners Foundation for supporting these programs. You can see this list of online workshops that the Master Gardeners have continued to put on over this last year. We've been making it work, and there's a lot of stuff that's going on. The two organizations do a lot to support the community. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that. We're going to talk about hummingbirds today, and since my day job is a biologist, I hope that I am going to be able to bring you a few little fun facts in my presentation. You can see I've got a couple of trivia questions here. Go ahead and go through those. A hummingbird does not have which one of the five senses, either sight, hearing, smell, taste, or touch. Hummingbirds don't have smell really to speak of. They're super visual creatures. They rely on their sight a lot, and we'll talk a lot about their sight today. True or false, a hummingbird weighs less than a nickel. That's true. Even the largest hummingbird species is a super lightweight little guy, so we have hummingbirds that range from the size of a little bumblebee all the way up to, well, just short of, I guess, like a swallow would be about an equivalent size. So they do get quite large, but they're very lightweight. Whether hummingbirds are found on every continent except Antarctica, this one's false. They're only native to North and South America. Hummingbirds are only found in the Western Hemisphere, so North and South America. We can see here, this is a map of the species richness. That is the number of species within the range of where hummingbirds live. Over half of the species live within the equatorial belt, so within about 10 degrees north and south of the equator. And you can see that here, this map shows the highest number of species in the yellow areas. And then out to the blues, north and south, you can see there's just a very few species out there. There's 338 total known species of hummingbirds in the world, primarily found in South America. 23 of those do live in North America, that's Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. And only a small number of those are year-round residents in North America, so they will migrate back and forth to South America, depending on the season. Migration is triggered by day length. It's tied to their food resources. So because day length affects the presence and absence of flowers and insects, the range of some species of hummingbirds expands and contracts toward the poles as the seasons progress. There are 7 species of hummingbirds that have been documented in Washington State. These are the 7, but these 3 here on the left, the rufous hummingbird, the black-chinned hummingbird, and Anna's hummingbird, are the 3 that we most commonly see west of the Cascades. Anna's hummingbird, this little guy here, is the one that we see year-round in our area. We can find them in western Washington and Oregon, even during winter. And in fact, usually in the wintertime when it snows, I find them checking out my feeders before I get a chance to go shake them off. And I always have to run out and do that before they get too hungry. I feel so bad for them when it's snowy. For those non-year-round residents that are heading to North America for breeding season, the northward migration begins in midwinter for us. So they're starting to move north out of Central and South America. In the middle of winter, we usually see the first birds in the U.S. in February. They're usually first seen in Texas. And the migration is usually over by May when the breeding season starts. So this is a map that's been online. You can go to hummingbirdcentral.com and check out kind of live migration maps. And basically, this is a website that allows you to add your own observations. You can go in and add that you've seen whichever species of hummingbird and click on your area and add a little hummingbird pin. This map that I have presented here, I pulled from last week, from April 26th. And you can see kind of the relative density of hummingbird sightings. This represents not only hummingbird density, but also keep in mind that this mostly represents the number of people that have documented their observations as well. Still, it's a really fun map to keep track of over time. You can go to this website and find observations from years past as well. On the northward migration, males generally are the first ones to leave South America and arrive north. They choose a territory to compete for the female's attention. And so they're looking for territories with the most resources. They'll stake out their claim and defend them quite fiercely. The females arrive a little bit later, and they are actually choosing the best territories, and then they'll mate with whichever male holds that territory. Because of this, most of the males try and get there as early as possible so that they can get the best territory. But they also have to be very careful not to arrive too early before the flowers are open and there's really enough food, the bugs are up, and there's enough food to keep them alive while they wait for the females to get there. Well, I had one other quick thought here with this map is that when they do begin to build their nest, the females are the only ones that do the nest building and care of the young. The males mostly are just there. After mating, the males, their job is to defend the territory. So the females build the nests. The nests are generally smaller than $50, so less than 3 inches across. They're usually made out of plant down, spider silk, a lot of lichens. They're really well camouflaged little cups. They hold about 2 eggs. They're about the size of jelly beans. And they generally only have 1 clutch of eggs for each year. Most males will leave for their southern migration before the females as well. And when they do this, that kind of opens up the food resources for their young, who stay back with the females until September when they start to migrate. An interesting thing is that hummingbirds migrate alone. They don't fly in flocks like geese. They fly solo. Generally, they fly along the same routes traveled earlier in their lives. But the really interesting thing is young hummingbirds, the first young of year hummingbirds, have to navigate alone without their parental guidance or any previous flight experience, and they still fly on roughly the same paths. They'll fly about 20 miles a day, and so they have to gain about 25 to 40% of their body weight before they start their migrations in order to really help make it. Migration happens during the day, so that's when most flowers are producing nectar. They get up in the morning, they feed really heavily, and then they travel during the midday. They do fly low so that they can see the food as they need it. They will stop in and eat more if they need it. They're really good at finding those tailwinds and letting those tailwinds give them an extra boost without having to expend a lot more energy. And then they stop in the evening to refuel. During their lives and their migrations, they pretty much need to run the gauntlet of predators. Predators are mostly a threat while the birds are young, especially while they're still in the nest and while the females are incubating their eggs. Predators can be anything from insects, like this spider. This picture is kind of amazing to me that something like a spider can trap a bird in their silk and that would become their dinner. But insects, rodents, other birds, snakes, they're all examples of predators. And Once the birds get out of the nest, once the mother birds are done with incubation and the babies have hatched and flown the nest, they're at a lot lower risk to predators than they were as babies, but they still get caught, especially by house cats, domestic cats, and occasionally by hawks or other birds. But they're really a lot less at risk as they grow up. So we know that hummingbirds drink the nectar from flowers. And you can see here, if you watch this tube, that the birds don't actually suck the nectar through their bills, but they lick it with this very long forked tongue. Hummingbirds will drink nectar from flowers. They also will take tree sap. They will drink juice from broken fruits, and they eat lots of insects. In fact, insects actually make up the bulk of their diet. That's where they get their protein and a lot of the necessary nutrients that they need. They eat about half of their weight in sugar each day. They usually have about 5 to 8 feedings per hour. The rest of the time, they spend resting, digesting, and then in the evenings while they sleep, they kind of go into this state of torpor where they can really slow their heartbeat down. Their wing beats are really fast. This is a slow motion video, of course. The largest species, the giant hummingbird, their wings will beat 10 to 15 times per second. The smallest species has the fastest wing beat with about 80 beats per second. But most of the North American species that we see that migrate up here have around 50 wing beats per second. They fly about 30 miles an hour on average. They can make 60 in a dive. And so they're just little busy animals full of energy. You can see this bird here is perched on a twig. Their legs allow them to perch and they can move sideways, but they can't walk forward like other animals do. However, these birds are the only birds that can fly backwards and sustain a hovering position, and they even can fly upside down. There are a couple of other unique tools, though, that these birds have that allow them to live the hummingbird life, and most of that has to do with their eyes and their eyesight. So hummingbirds, like humans, are really visual animals. Nature communicates with hummingbirds in color. Hummingbirds communicate with each other in color. And so I thought I'd take just a quick second to talk about how our eyes, and in general, how do eyes see color. So we have this diagram here, and you can see at the back of your eye, it's lined with these different cones. And these cone cells function in light, and they pick up the different wavelengths of light, which are associated with the different colors. So, for example, long light wavelengths tend to be red, short wavelengths tend to be blue, and then there's a range in the middle. Humans have 3 different types of cone cells: red, blue, and green wavelength-sensitive cone cells. And we see those spectral colors that are visible in the rainbow. Most of the colors that we see, because we only have these 3 different cone types, most of the colors we see are actually not an illusion, but they're something that we see because of the variation in activation between these different cones. So, for example, when we see purple, it's because we see light wavelengths in blue and in red, and it stimulates those cones in our eyes to different extents, but it doesn't stimulate the greens, so we see purple. Now, a hummingbird has kind of super eyesight. Hummingbirds rely on color to find their food, to attract their mates, defend territories, evade predators, to navigate. Their eyesight is so important to these animals. And for a while, scientists have suspected that hummingbirds might be able to see UV colors, ultraviolet colors. And recent research shows that this is true. In 2020, a kind of a cool experiment was done to test this idea that they can see UV. And what they did was they put out colored feeders. And they put some feeders out that were painted with just the typical plain everyday colors, non-UV colors. They painted those feeders with those colors and then filled them with plain water. Then they painted some with the same colors, but applied a UV coating over those feeders so that they then had that extra boost. And they filled those with nectar, with food. These looked identical to our eyes because we don't see in the UV spectrum. But they found that the birds learned to avoid the plain water feeders over time. And once the birds were really steady and showed that they had learned that the plain water feeders weren't what they were interested in, the researchers changed the location of the feeders to make sure that it wasn't just the location the birds were keying into. And sure enough, the birds continued to go to those UV-coated feeders. So that kind of confirmed the idea that hummingbirds can see UV colors. So they've got kind of that extra tool to help them find food, because we know that a lot of flowers also have UV colors on them. If you thought that the ability to see UV light was pretty amazing, these birds have another amazing feature. Hummingbirds see the colors of flowers by a different mechanism than they see the colors on their potential mates or their competitors. They see it differently than they see the colors of other birds. And you can see in this video, particularly that one hummingbird that he'll come back in a second, but you might have noticed as he was looking into the camera and from the back, you could see that his chin was very bright red. And then as he pivoted, see this guy here on the side too. As he pivots, this color changes. Now, if that was just a regular plant, a regular pigment like we see in plants, like the pigments that we can see with our eyes, it wouldn't change color like that. So the interesting fact about the hummingbird feathers is that some of them are actually colorless. They have no color. So these bright red colors that we see aren't there in the form of a pigment exactly. So super amazing. I gave a version of this talk last year about this time, but even over the last year, science has continued to happen. People have continued to study and write up their research and get it published. And so this feature of these colorless feathers, these iridescent feathers that we see, was recently described in a 2020 peer-reviewed publication in the journal Evolution. And the authors of this paper found out that the structure and shape of the surface of the feathers is actually what gives them their color and their ability to change color, because it depends on how the light moves across the surface of the feathers. If you think about a soap bubble, it kind of gives you that idea where a little bit of soap on its own doesn't have color, but if you spread that soap out and give it, over kind of a dome-shaped bubble, you start to see that rainbow of iridescent colors. So a little bit more about the feathers themselves and how they achieve that. All the bird's feathers across the bird kingdom are made of the same material as our hair and nails. So they're made out of keratin. And their feathers look like tiny trees. They've got the main trunk running down the center with branches, and then you have these little barbules, or the leaves of the trees, that have the pigment producing organelles. Those are called melanosomes for what it's worth for today. But we have melanosomes too. That's what helps give us our pigment in our skin and our hair. But as we just said, pigment's not really the only way to get that. So the melanosomes in hummingbirds have a very different shape and arrangement, and that's what influences the way the light bounces off of them. So we call these kinds of colors structural colors because they depend on that shape of the surface of the structure. So in these cells, you start to see that the hummingbirds, if you looked at these under an electron microscope, you would see that the cells of the hummingbirds are unique in their shape and structure. So we think about mallard ducks, the drakes, the males of mallard ducks have those iridescent green heads. But even among birds, hummingbird cell structures are unique, whereas the duck cells are solid and log-shaped. And when the light bends off of those, we see that iridescent green and black. The hummingbird's cells are kind of pancake-shaped, and they have a lot of air bubbles inside. And so they get stacked to different thicknesses. They create different shapes, and as the light moves over those cell surfaces, you get these really brilliant colors that change as we look at them. Last little fun fact here about this, because I just found this really fascinating. Even more interesting than the cell structure to me is the fact that the genes for the thickness of these cells are separate from the genes that tell the cells how to be stacked. So these animals can mix and match the thickness and shape of the cells in so many different ways. It's how each species of hummingbird gets their unique appearance from each other species. They can make, it's like if you think about being able to make more outfits out of 3 shirts and 3 pairs of pants than you can if you had 3 dresses. So they have these, over time they've evolved these traits separately, and it gives them a lot of diversity, 338 species around the world. So now that we've found these facts out, we're kind of starting to think about why is it, if so many color combinations are possible, then why do we see so many hummingbirds that are largely green? Maybe it reflects historical events or predation or preference by the female. Maybe it has to do with camouflage. There's lots of answers, and that's the direction that these scientists will probably be going through, looking in the future to learn more about the hummingbirds. So hummingbirds are amazing. And if you're interested in attracting more hummingbirds, there's a lot of things that we can look at in the habitats that we can create in our garden to encourage them to choose our yard as their territory, or as part of their territory. We want to build our garden with trees and shrubs to provide structure for them, structure for perching, structure for cover, and protection, structure for building nests. We also want to try and add water. Keeping fresh water around is something that they'll find attractive. It's good to have lots of insects for them to dine on, so go easy on the insecticides, or don't use them at all. It would be even better if you can do that. When you start to think about what flowers to add into your garden, you know, red and oranges are really commonly visited, but they're not the only flowers that the hummingbirds like. They go into all different, you know, fuchsias, all different colors of flowers. In our yards, over the years, we've had those red hot poker flowers. Those are always a big hit with them. Fuchsias are great. Flowering tobacco, and when I've lived in other parts of the country, those were other popular plants with the birds. So add some flowers. It'll add color for your garden, for you and for the birds. You want to add water and feeders. You want to keep those two things not too close to a window to help reduce injury or death by impact into those windows. Birds are really territorial, and hummingbirds are no exception. They will fight even their own reflection, and that makes a big thing for injury. There is some UV stickers that you can buy that you can put on your windows to help your hummingbirds see those windows and not run into them more often. But generally, just keep your hummingbird feeders a little bit further away from your windows, and that's great. Misters, like I said, they love water. They need someplace to perch. They spend about 80% of their time sitting on twigs or stems or clotheslines between their feedings, and so give them someplace to rest. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, you can see their nests are made of plant down, and they're kind of cobbled together with spider webs. So it doesn't hurt if you don't clear out all of your spider webs. So let's talk about what makes a good feeder, starting with the food. This little guy that we're looking at here, this poor guy is really ill because he's been drinking from a feeder that had the wrong nectar mix. Some people tend to try and do something other than granulated sugar. You want to use only granulated sugar in your feeders. Honey is probably the cause of what's going on here. Fungal spores that are carried in honey can make a bird very sick. They tend to bloom in the back of their tongue or in their gullet, and she can't retract her tongue anymore. So she's probably not going to make it because she can't feed anymore. So it's super important to make your nectar recipe in the right way, and that is to use plain granulated sugar. No honey, no brown sugar, certainly no artificial sweeteners. You don't need colors or food dye. If you want to add colors, it's best to do it to your feeder and not to the material that you put into it. I recommend that your mix be 1 part sugar to 5 parts water. This concentration is really close to what is actually in the color and in the flowers. I'm sorry. And actually, they found that the Anna's hummingbird, which is the one that we see most often here, we see it all year long. The flowers that those animals prefer have a 1 to 5 or 1 to 6 ratio in their nectar of sugar to water. You don't want to get a higher concentration. A lot of people think that if they have a more sugary feed, that it's better because they'll see more and more birds coming to it. But the truth about that one is that the birds are coming to drink because they're becoming more dehydrated and they need to drink more and they're thirsty. And so they keep coming back to this feeder that may or may not have the right mix to it. So keep if it's hot, they're going to drink more anyway. But if your feeder is the wrong mix and it's one of the only ones in the area, they'll keep coming back to it because it's readily available and they're super thirsty. So we want to keep our birds healthy. Let's keep our sugar mixture no higher than a 1 to 4 ratio. I recommend 1 to 5 just because it's what our local birds like to have. It's really also important to offer them fresh food. Try and replace the nectar every 2 or so days, regardless of your feeder size. So we're going to make some pretty small feeders today. But even if you have those big feeders, you should really try and replace it every few days and keep it clean. As it evaporates, that sugar concentration tends to go up. And every time you change your food, it's recommended that you clean your feeder really good so that the mold and the fungus and stuff that grow on those feeders and also eat those sugars don't get started in your feeder. So there's a few other characteristics of a good feeder. They should have a perch to let them sit while they're feeding. It's really great if your feeder is easy to clean, so that you're not dreading cleaning it. You don't put it off. You can clean it often. The wide mouth jars that we're using today, they're shallow and wide mouth. It makes them really easy to clean. There's not a lot of nooks and crannies to get into. That said, bottle brushes are always worth the investment to help clean any of your feeders. You want to keep them mold free. And so let's see, what else do we have? So the kits that you'll receive next week for the feeders that we're going to make today will have a small mason jar with the little ring that seals across the top. You're going to have this red plastic bit of cross-stitch mesh. There'll be some wire there, although you could very much use some twine to help do most of this. I'm not going to provide the feed, of course. That's something you can mix up for yourself. But I've got the slide here because in the future, if you come back to it and you want to think about what you were doing for making it, this sheet will kind of sum it up really quick. The only thing you really need for the basic feeder itself, for this little lantern-looking feeder here with the handle, is a pair of pliers. If you have a big spool wire, generally those pliers will have a cutter, but if not, a sturdy pair of scissors might also be helpful. We're also today going to make an ant moat. Sometimes, I've been really lucky in the house that I live in now, but sometimes ants will find their way to this lovely sugar, and putting a moat like this that you fill with water, the ants will come down the hook and then they hit the water, and there's not really a good place for them to go when you have a moat. So we're going to build a moat today also. The one that we're going to build and the one that'll come in the kit has a little 2-inch diameter terracotta pot. And you'll use some water to make a hook through that, and a little bit of mounting putty to help seal up the hole in the bottom. And to do this, it's always good to have a screwdriver or something, mostly just because that's the shape you're going to use to help bend the wire like you want it, and some pliers to help secure it. It's important to acknowledge I got a lot of this information over the years from a number of different sources, and this slide will be included in the one that we have in the recording for you guys to come back to in the future. So, Gary or Alice, I might need a little bit of feedback here as I transition over. If you are watching, in the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom screen is a little thing that says View. And if you switch that over, if you click on that and switch over to Speaker View, it may help enlarge the screen so that you can see better what I'm about to do for the demonstration for making the feeder.
It's perfect on my end, Karen.
Looks
Great.
good. Looks good.
Okay, so what we have are the materials that you will get in your kit. They're going to come kind of all condensed, but you've got your little 2-inch pot, and you'll find a piece of putty in your pot. Get into the screen, find my location. There we go. So yeah, you're gonna find the little 2-inch pot here. You're gonna have your little jar with a ring. You'll have your bit of plastic mesh. And the feeders are so simple to put together. So you're gonna put this mesh down on top of your jar, and you're just gonna screw on your lid. The real trick comes in getting the wire wrapped around it properly. So we've got 3 pieces of wire. They're about 1 foot long if you decide to go out and get more materials to make more of these for yourself later. But you're going to start off by taking the first piece of wire and just wrapping it around the base of the jar. And you want to make this nice and tight. Give it a good twist. These wires, this is jewelry wire. If you wanted to use that green garden wire, that would work just as well. But what this loop does is it gives you a place for your handle to hook in. So you're going to take another piece of wire. Actually, I always jump the gun on this piece. So I try not to manipulate these wires too much because they can get kind of fragile themselves. But you do need to get them hooked underneath the wire. So you can fold these ends up. I'm going to bend an arc in the wire, connect it to the other side. Then you can kind of manipulate everything into the shape and the location so that you have a balanced feeder.
Karen, move over to the left of the screen a little. There you go.
Thank you, Alice. Okay, so we have our little feeder all ready to go, and you will want to, kind of fiddle with these handles. You can get your pliers in there to kind of tighten up the edge of the little loops. And you're set to hang the feeder now. There's a couple of things about the feeders that are good to know. The first thing is when you fill it with your nectar, I would recommend taking the whole top off and filling directly in. You can pour through here, but if you do that, make sure that you wipe the surface off just to keep the attraction to yellow jackets and other wasps down. They will come and visit this feeder. But this is a good feeder for that, because what they will find is that the liquid level, because the hummingbirds are going to be able to get their bills into these holes, they can get their bills in there. We saw that they have those long forked tongues, so they're going to be able to reach down and get the nectar. The wasps don't have that. So they're going to get here, and as long as this is clean, they may find themselves frustrated and leave it alone. They'll come and investigate, but it won't be a common hangout. The other thing to keep in mind is you do want to fill this up fairly full. It doesn't need to touch the red, and because of the wasp situation, the yellow jacket situation, that's not recommended. But you want to bring it up nice and full so that the birds can get to it easily and find it, and will continue to come back to it. And it's a small jar. If you have a lot of birds, it'll go down quickly. It'll be used up quickly. So you'll probably want to refill it. I just keep an eye on it. I in the summertime, I usually refill mine. Like I'll fill it in the morning on Saturday, and I'll probably refill it like on Sunday evening. But it's super easy to take apart and clean. So your feeder is a super quick and easy thing to do. For your moat, let's see, where am I at here? Okay, for your moat, we have this little 2-inch terracotta pot. It has this hole. Your wire will run right through it very easily. So that's great. There are a couple of different ways you can do this. So you can start by taking a pencil or a screwdriver, and you're just gonna wind your wire around that screwdriver to make your hook. And then once you've got this hook, you can bend your wire in a lot of different shapes. I'll demonstrate a couple of different ways to make this hook, but you can take your wire and just start making kind of a flower shape, where you're just going to bend in a couple of figure eights to make this stand where your pot will sit, your little moat will sit. This is wire intensive. It takes up a good amount of the wire that we've cut. Okay, and so when you have this little flower, you can roll that hook up. So you have this little clover shape. You can do, this is where your creativity can come in a little bit. You can do all kinds of shapes. And then you've got your hook here in the bottom. And then you're going to thread this top piece into your moat, and then you'll bend this into the hook inside as well. So you've got your moat ready to go, but you still have this hole in the bottom, and that's where your putty is going to come in handy. So you're just going to take your little piece of putty, and you're going to wrap it around the bottom of the pot and around the wire, so that it seals over that hole, and your hook is going to press into it. So you've got the pressure of the water. When you hang it from the middle, the pressure of the moat itself will help to hold the seal here. So that putty will be there for you to help seal it up, and that will help you hold water. Now, another way that I like to do these hooks is a little less wire intensive, and I like to do it this way because that gives me more wire to play with. So for another type of hook, all you need to do is, again, you're going to loop around your pencil or your screwdriver to make your first hook. And then you can take your pliers and snip the length off. And then I like to go with this loop. I'll thread the loop side into the cut. And then when you get down here, again, you can take your putty and just wrap it around. So if you're doing more of these, this is what I came up with. I've thought about how I was going to do this. This is just, it's some mounting putty. I got it at Lowe's. But what I also like about it, aside from the fact that it's indoor and outdoor, is that it's terracotta color. So it kind of matches. It doesn't make a big to-do, but you wrap it around your stem, and then you can push that in. And make your second loop. And then you just want to pull that pot really close down onto your loop. So this is where you're going to put a little S hook. You could also just directly wrap your wire around your feeder, and then this will hook up to wherever you're going to hang your feeder from. So these are your feeder. This is your ant moat, and you'll be ready to fill both of them. The terracotta pots are fun. Actually, both of these, the jar and the pot, are something that you could paint, you can decorate, you can seal this or not. Terracotta, as you might know, is used for water storage underground sometimes. So it has the ability to wick liquid from the inside through the clay. It's very porous. Because you're changing this out so often, that's not a big obstacle. But if you wanted to, you could probably put a sealer on the inside. This isn't meant as a water source. And I have never actually seen anything use it as a water source. So it's not such a concern about what kind of sealant you use. You can just use a standard paint sealer or something. You can decorate the outside of your moat and your hummingbird feeder, and it's just a lot of fun. It's super simple, to make. You've probably got at least a couple of these objects at home that you can just get started with really quickly. As I mentioned, if you have extra wire or different thicknesses of wire, I mean, you can decorate. I like to make little spirals to kind of hang off of my feeders. The wire is just so malleable. It's very easy to use in a lot of different ways to decorate. So that is my quick and easy hummingbird feeder. And I don't know if there's any questions. I would be happy to help answer them if I can, or help find the answers and send those to you.